This is episode 10 of the Feed Your Soul with Kim podcast. Today we talk about emotional hunger. We'll discuss what emotional hunger really is and how it's different than physical hunger. You'll learn some signs to know if you're an emotional eater, and you'll come away with a doable that will help you end emotional eating. Let's get started. This is the Feed Your Soul with Kim podcast. I'm Kim McLaughlin, and I'm the host of the show. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, an inspirational speaker, coach, and a best-selling author. I help people feed their soul by putting food in its proper place as nourishment. And I help them develop functional ways to nurture themselves with things other than with food. We talk a lot about food in this podcast, and today's no exception. As we go on further with the podcast, we will be talking about other things beside food, but I want to get a really good foundation, and today is part of that foundational learning. Today, we're talking about emotional hunger. And I know that we talked in episode 2 about what emotional eating is. And this is really just an extension of that and giving you more foundation and more understanding about emotional eating. And today it'll be in the context of hunger. What I want you to remember is that really emotional eating is something that everybody's done at certain points in their life. It's really something that is socially acceptable, and we allow it at Christmas time, at Thanksgiving, at 4th of July, their birthdays, and those are the times that we do talk or allow ourselves to overeat and to eat for maybe emotional reasons. Maybe we might be sad or upset or happy, but we overeat on those days, and it's really allowed. When I talk about emotional eating or emotional hunger, it's really when it becomes a problem for you and it interferes with your life and it interferes with you on a day-to-day basis. As I talk about this more and more, I think those of you that really resonate with the idea of emotional eating will will get it more and more as we talk about it each week. So today is, as I said, a continuation of what we talked about in episode 2 about emotional eating. Today with emotional hunger, I want you to get more in depth. We're going to get more in depth about how emotions can cause a type of hunger in us. And think about it. There are feelings that come up that will often lead those of us who emotionally eat into eating, such as stress can lead to eating, sadness can lead to eating, happiness can lead to eating, overwhelmed can lead to eating, excitement can lead to eating, boredom, loneliness, tired. Those all can lead to eating, and it's something that can happen transiently every once in a while, but I think those of you that really will resonate with this, it happens more often than you notice. And I want us to start identifying when we're engaging in that emotional hunger and that emotional eating, because that's a starting point to do something different and to make a different decision. I often talk about the story of how, when we're at work and we're struggling and we're feeling overwhelmed and tired, and that 3 o'clock dip, and somebody will say, I'm stressed. I want to go get something to eat. Who's in? Who wants to go with me? And that's often a time that people will go and eat is over that. And that's really something that we find is socially acceptable. But there's a point where it becomes an everyday occurrence and we do it and end up not feeling good in the end. And that's where I want you to start thinking about emotional hunger and emotional eating, is that it doesn't satisfy the emotions. It doesn't solve the problem. What happens when we use food for emotions is, well, think about it. You have emotions all throughout the day. And if you're eating over those emotions on a daily basis, what happens? Weight gain happens, tummy trouble happens, you feel bad about your body and about how you look, and you just don't feel good about yourself. I find that a lot of people, once they engage in emotional eating, will tend to then feel very negative about themselves and actually make a lot more negative statements and move off of feeling positive about themselves because they're so upset about the overeating and they're so upset about whatever the repercussions are of the overeating. So that makes them feel mad at themselves. So you then have this emotion that happens, you have the eating that happens, and then all the problems that happen afterwards. And it causes a problem. And that's what I want you to start identifying. Emotional hunger is one of four hungers, and we'll talk about the four hungers in a different podcast. I have a lot of ideas, and I share it more in depth in my book, Feed Your Soul, Nourish Your Life. I talk about the four hungers, but basically the four hungers are physical hunger, emotional hunger, heart hunger, mouth hunger, and head hunger, the kind of thoughts about wanting to eat. So those four hungers lead you in the direction of eating, and only one of the hungers are a true hunger. The physical hunger is really what we want to be responding to all the time in terms of when we eat. I get that there'll be times when we eat for emotional reasons. Like I said, it can be at Thanksgiving or Christmas and or every once in a while, but it's not on a regular basis. That's when it becomes a problem. When we engage in that emotional hunger, when we have that hunger, that emotional hunger, and it shows up and we eat, what is interesting to me is that that is the time that we tend to eat the foods that we would call bad foods. As you know, as those of you that have listened before, you know that I don't consider any food a bad food, but I know that there are some societal expectations that there are foods that are good foods, healthy foods, and non-healthy foods. What I find when we eat for emotional reasons, we tend to go to these what we might call forbidden foods, the foods that we think we're not supposed to have. And those foods tend to have more fat in them, more salt in them, more sugar in them, and more carbohydrates. Those foods are the ones we're drawn to because our diet culture, our diet mentality tells us those are foods that are bad and wrong and we shouldn't have. Well, what's the best thing to have when you're feeling down and upset and overwhelmed and overloaded is one of those foods that are maybe forbidden because they taste good and they are something that you don't have. And so it feels like a treat and it feels special and it feels like you're giving yourself something really good. The problem with that is that that engages then that diet mentality that we've talked about, where you set yourself up to binge, feel guilty, and then want to diet, right? It's a circle. It's a circle that starts with restricting food, dieting, going into then binging and overeating, which is what we're just talking about when we have that emotional hunger that shows up in that binge. Then we go to having, following through on the circle, we have shame and embarrassment and guilt show up. And those are tough feelings to handle because the shame's a kind of, I call it like a black oozy feeling because it just doesn't feel good. And if you're not necessarily noticing that you're feeling shame, you're then going to want to restrict your food because that's going to, you think that that will lead you out of feeling bad about yourself and bad about your body. So, this idea of emotional hunger is something that we need to pull out in order to disengage from the binging. We talked a lot about, I have here in my notes that we talked a lot about that diet binge shame cycle in episode 3. So if you're interested in learning more about that, then go back to episode 3 and you can get some more information about that. One of the strategies to dealing with emotional hunger is we have to really know what it is. And that's why I have a definition of emotional hunger. It's going to sound really similar to what we talked about when we talked about am I an emotional eater, but I think these might be a little different and kind of add some more clarity to emotional eating and emotional hunger. So here are some signs. I have quite a few of them that I've written down to share with you. One is a sign of emotional hunger is when you eat when you're not hungry. That's pretty simple, that if you're not hungry on a consistent basis and you're eating, check out that it's not emotional hunger that's driving you to eat. Another sign of emotional hunger is when you're eating, when you're experiencing feelings. When those feelings are coming up, that you notice that you're wanting to go towards the food. Just like I said, the story about people who eat at work midday when they're feeling stressed. They'll say outright, I'm feeling stressed, I'm feeling bored, I'm feeling overwhelmed. Let's go get something to eat. And that's a direct connection between having the feelings and having that emotional kind of hunger. Another sign of emotional hunger is when you eat in isolation and you eat in secret. It's really a sign that you're feeling upset with yourself and feeling upset about what's going on and feeling embarrassed. That isolation and secretiveness is about feeling like you don't want others to see what you're doing. And that's a real direct reflection on emotional hunger. Another sign is eating and feeling guilty afterwards. Remember, this is what we talked about with the diet binge guilt cycle. And when you're feeling guilty after eating, you can bet you're eating over emotional reasons. You're not eating because you're physically hungry. When we're physically hungry and we eat foods that satisfy us, we're not going to feel guilty afterwards because we've just done something that feels good for our body and makes us feel enlivened and have energy to do all the things we need to do. One of the biggest signs of emotional hunger is when you overeat and you don't know why. You overeat and you don't know why. That's a big sign that there is something emotionally going on because you haven't identified it, but you're overeating just because of it. People will often tell me that they overeat um, because it's yummy. I mean, there are some other kinds of hungers that can come into play, which is kind of that mouth hunger that might make you want to eat. But this is about when you're overeating and you just can't stop. You feel compelled. That is a real sign that there's some emotions going on that are leading you to feel hungry, it, to feel emotionally hungry, which remember, as we said, emotional hunger is not physical hunger. When you're eating to make yourself feel better, that's another sign of emotional hunger, that you're eating in order to satisfy these emotions that are going on. When you crave a food for no apparent reason, that also can be a sign of emotional hunger because you're trying to take care of yourself with a food, and sometimes certain food will be associated with certain feelings. Like I know people that will overeat like sweet things in the evening time when they're feeling bored and lonely. So they're like wanting those sweet foods, and it's at a time when they feel lonely and bored. And so they tend to go together for people. There are connections that we've made throughout our lives, most especially when we were children, that we can connect certain foods with certain feelings. And when we pull it apart and start looking at what those feelings are, we can really make more of an understanding about what it is. The last thing I wrote is one other last sign of emotional hunger is when you think you have to eat something or you're going to die. You know, if I don't have this food, I'm going to die. I can't manage life without it. And you just keep wanting it and wanting it and wanting it. And I wonder what's going on inside of you, that feeling that makes you feel like you have to eat, like there's nothing else you can do to satisfy it, right? There's nothing else that can satisfy that feeling more than the certain food that you're eating. So these signs of emotional hunger, there are lots of them. There are lots more, and they do have an interplay with all the other hungers, with the heart emotional hunger has an interplay with the mouth hunger and has an interplay with the thought hunger. But I just need you to start looking at what are those feelings going on. What we know is that when we eat, we feel good. That's why when we have that emotional hunger, we eat and we feel good. And it's true because that food can have that calming relief effect for some amount of time. And we've connected the food and that feeling enough to where we'll do it on a regular basis because our heart, our emotions know that if we eat, then we're going to feel better. And what I know for sure, 100% sure, is that when you eat for emotional hunger, you're only going to feel good for a certain amount of time, generally a small amount of time. So you have the thoughts about the food, the feeling of wanting to eat, you eat, and then there's definitely an amount of time that you feel good. And then there's absolutely after that a large amount of time where you feel bad. What we want to do is to start noticing that it's just a minimal amount of time that it feels good. That's what encourages you to keep doing it. People say, well, why do I keep doing it over and over again? Kind of really expecting a different result. Well, because one, it feels really good. It gives a hit of dopamine to your brain. You feel wonderful. And that's what you're looking for, that feel good feeling. And that helps you for the moment. The problem is that the emotions don't get fixed. There's no solving of the problem. There's no solving of what led you to want to eat. And that's why it's a problem. That's why it's a problem overall. To me, that's the problem. The gaining weight is what we tend to notice as the problem. So we'll say, I don't want to emotionally overeat because I don't want to gain weight. I'm saying, let's just not emotionally eat because we're not satisfying ourselves and we're not satisfying our feelings. The problem with emotional eating and responding to emotional hunger is that it leads to a lot of problems. And this is that time after it feels good when it doesn't feel good. And here are some ways that it leads to a problem in the end. It leads you to feel guilty. It leads you to feel ashamed. So you're feeling not good about yourself and you're feeling not good about your behavior. It also leads you to feel upset with yourself that you overate. There's a lot of condemnation and saying, I'm bad. I shouldn't have done that. I feel bad about myself. And you then feel upset about yourself, which leads to more feelings, right? There are more feelings that show up that don't feel good. And that's because you overate. There's also a feeling of the feeling that triggered the binge. So so you have what I just said is that you feel upset that you overeat. So that's an additional feeling, but also the original feeling that led you to overeat has never been dealt with. Food does not manage those feelings. Food is not the way to cope with those feelings or to help them out or to help you move forward. It doesn't work. So this is a strategy that ends up not working and actually taking you into the negative. It takes you down in a way that's really tough because you're then feeling really bad about yourself when you started out already feeling bad about yourself. The other problems that it leads to is feeling upset that you gained weight or even feeling worried that you might gain weight. Those are those feelings that are really the after effect, and they're just kind of an additional problem that makes it harder and harder. And those are the reasons why managing emotional hunger, noticing emotional hunger, and actually dealing with emotional hunger in a perfect or proper way is the right thing to do. So how do we deal with this is the process, I think, starts with noticing it and naming it. And that's why I spend a lot of time in these first podcasts talking about what is emotional eating and what is emotional hunger, because you've got to start noticing it. And I want you to notice it in a way that is kind and loving and caring because you've used this as a method for probably many, many, many years. And it's become ingrained. It's become a habit, right? It's the habit of how you deal with feelings. Let's just take it easy on ourselves and be kind, but let's start noticing it. So that is the starting part. That's the starting piece of how you manage this process is notice it and name it. I like to say things like, I'm an emotional eater. I ate for emotional reasons. I respond to emotional hunger. Those are things where we're starting to notice that I do this and it's not a negative on me. It's more of an understanding of this is what I do. And I'm being honest with myself that this is what's happening. There is power in that kind of honesty. And there's also power in that kind of vulnerability with yourself that you're being honest about what's really going on. It might lead you to feel negativity towards yourself and end up beating yourself up and telling yourself negative things. I can't believe this. I'll never get over this. I'm never going to stop. I'm stupid. I'm fat. I'm whatever. And I really want you to stop it. It doesn't help to get into that negativity. And the negativity leads to more negativity, which leads to more overeating. It leads to more of that diet binge shame cycle, and it doesn't work. Making yourself wrong, making yourself bad, making yourself terrible is a recipe for disaster. And it's a recipe for continuing this problem moving forward. It really leads you back to binging. And I want you to stop it. I know that there's a lot more that goes into it in terms of how to stop the thoughts and the behaviors, and we're going to talk about those as the week goes on. But if you're engaging in beating yourself up just because you've noticed that you emotionally eat, stop it. And that's exactly one of the things I do is I just say to myself, Kim, stop it. This is not helpful, and this is not going to get me in a better place. So being aware and being mindful is really what we want. And mindfulness is a calm, assured, very loving way to treat yourself with this overeating and the emotional hunger. I suspect that you haven't ever looked at this problem before, that you haven't ever talked about it or you haven't ever thought about it. It's often really painful. And that's one of the reasons we tend to go to the diet mentality and the diet mindset because we've never known what to do. And those are the tools and skills I'm going to help you with each week that we're going to go over on this podcast. It's going to be practical, realistic, functional ways to engage with food. But more than that, it's going to be how you engage with your life. And that's what we're going to do on each and every podcast. So I encourage you to keep listening because we have a lot more to take care of. Hi, everyone. This is Kim, and my book is out. Feed Your Soul, Nourish Your Life, a 6-step system to peace with food is live. I recommend you get it. It has all my 6 components of feeding your soul, as well as my own story. Pick it up now. You can find it on my website at feedyoursoulunlimited.com. Thanks. As we do every week, we have one doable that I propose to you in order to have something different that you can do during the week to engage in looking at food differently, looking at your life differently, and doing something that is going to actually help you to move forward in a positive direction. Today, when I was thinking about emotional hunger, I was trying to think of what is a great tool for you, and it's one that we've actually talked about before, and I don't want you to discard it because it's really the idea of self-care is the tool I want us to look at again today. It is a tool that is one of the most important that I do with every client when they're new. I'll ask them, what do they do to take care of themselves? And either they tell me, I don't know, I don't do anything, or they kind of look at me sideways and go, what? I don't know what that is. And it's really a consistent problem where 100% of the people that I work with that have emotional eating and emotional hunger, don't do. They don't take good care of themselves. And this is critical. And it's something I'm gonna drill in every week about how we take better care of ourselves. One of the things I recommend is making a list of 100 self-care tools you can use. And I know that's a lot. That sounds like a lot, and it is. And it was hard for me to do when I had to make up my 100 on my self-care list. I wrote about this in my book, Feed Your Soul, Nourish Your Life. And if you have the book, I put it's on page 86. And if you don't have the book, you might want to consider getting it because there are lots of resources to help you with this self-care list, to help you figure out what you need to do to help take better care of yourself. So what I want you to do is for this week is to write out 5 self-care tools you could use. 5. That's really easy. And I was writing down, thinking about what 5 I put on my list. And actually, for this weekend, it is meditation, taking a walk, going to the movies, have a quiet evening at home, and go to the gym. So those are 5 of them. And what I want you to do is to actually physically write it down in a journal, write it down on a piece of paper, and keep it and do one of them. Engage in one self-care activity this week. I'm not asking for a lot. If it means tonight I'm going to stay home and we're going to watch TV. So that actually is one thing I'm going to do tonight. I'm really looking forward to just some downtime and not having to do anything in particular. And another thing actually I didn't put on my list that I'm actually going to do for my self-care this weekend is I love musical theater. I love live musical theater, and I got my husband and I tickets to go to a play this weekend, one that I've never seen, and I am so excited to go. It is one of the ways that I love taking care of myself, to listen to the music, watch the play, all the pretty costumes and the songs, and get the music, and it really makes me feel good. And that's what I'm looking for you, is engaging in self-care techniques, using self-care tools that make you feel better, because as we work on these feelings and start taking care of the feelings, we want to have something to put in its place. As we take food out of the line of what we use to take care of our feelings, we've got to have something in its place. There's got to be something that is helpful and good for you that you do on a regular basis. I want you to think about the 5 self-care tools that I told you that I'm going to do, that I'm going to look at. None of them had to do with food. None of them were about the type of food I was going to eat or how much I was going to eat. It was really about what I was going to do to take care of myself. And I really encourage you to do that as your doable this week. Write down 5 self-care techniques, choose one of them, and do it this week. I would love to hear about it. You can go to my Feed Your Soul community and you can log in and ask to be part of the group. I'd love to hear what you do for your self-care technique. I love hearing what other people do so that I know get to think of new techniques when I hear other people talk about them. It's really helpful to have a sharing of the ideas together so that we help. It takes a village to help us figure out what kind of self-care we can all do. So that's what I wish for you, is one self-care tool this week. I'm Kim McLaughlin. This has been a great podcast. We're talking about emotional hunger. I'm from feedyoursoulunlimited.com. Go check out my website. I got lots of blogs there, and you'll hear more in the show notes. I'll write some blogs in the show notes that you can go to help you out. I look forward to talking to you next week on your Feed Your Soul with Kim podcast. Have a great rest of the day, everybody. Bye. Thank you for joining us on the Feed Your Soul with Kim podcast. We come to you every Monday with fresh new ideas to help you end emotional eating and put food in its proper place as nourishment. Please be sure to subscribe to this podcast and review it and let us know what you think. Thank you for joining us.